A Florentine noblewoman stomping on her heels was on her way to meet her fiancé. She was neither beautiful nor tall, but she played up her shortcomings with a filigree of new-fashioned clothes. She compensated for her short stature with small heels covered with fabric and her figure with a beautiful corset made of whalebone. She asked for her corset to be as tight as possible so that her fiancé, Henry of Orleans, would immediately fall in love with her. In the luxury of the 16th century, she embodied Italian beauty. A swirl of thick, dark red hair enveloped her face, on which stood out extraordinary eyes. She had a very wise look in her eyes. Her life was not a happy one. At an early age, she realized the sad truth that happiness would be a struggle. Catherine de Medici was born April 13, 1519 in Florence. Her father was the Duke of Urbino Lorenzo II, and her mother Madeleine de la Tour, a relative of the French King Francis I. Catherine combined the wealth of the Medici bankers and her mother's high title. It seemed an incredible stroke of luck, but unfortunately, Catherine became an orphan almost immediately after her birth. Madeleine de la Tour died 2 weeks after delivery of syphilis, as well as her seriously ill husband, who gifted his wife with such a savory bouquet. It is surprising that if Madeleine was really sick with syphilis, then at birth did not infect her daughter with it. And the inheritance of the baby immediately went to the Duchy of Urbino. Since the girl was still young, no one ruled out her premature death. The duchy was too large and rich to ignore its importance. But Catherine was sturdy. She had survived that dangerous threshold during which children died, and the struggle for influence over Catherine began. In 1527, when Catherine was only 8 years old, the glorious Medici banking family in Europe fell. All the Medici were banished from Florence except Catherine. It was as if she, an orphan, had been forgotten. Remembering Catherine's existence, she was placed in a convent where she wandered for 2 years. The little prisoner, a favorite of the nuns, had a very dim future. Soon Catherine was again plagued by adversity. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V laid siege to Florence. The inhabitants blamed for all the troubles of an innocent child. They even proposed hanging Catherine from the city walls. But she was saved by her uncle Giulio de' Medici, who became Pope Clement VII. Catherine finally felt safe. She lived in a luxurious palace, studied science and culture, and spent her free time carefree. She liked Rome, a majestic city with centuries of history, unusual frescoes, sculptures, and people themselves. But in the plans of Clement VII absolutely did not fit to leave his niece. She is a commodity in the marriage market of political intrigue. The Pope was considering whom he would marry his orphaned niece. She was no longer rich enough or of high enough status to marry a prince or king. King James V of Scotland tried his luck to marry Catherine because of her title as niece of the Pope, but this marriage was not in the pontiff's interest. Clement chose the second son of the King of France. Henry of Orleans was a frisky boy of 14. He was not the heir to the throne, but still the Pope liked him better. The marriage took place in Marseille on October 28, 1533. Francis I diligently prepared for this event, knowing the Pope's preference for art and pomp. Catherine's dowry was relatively modest, only 100,000 gold écus. Also under the protectorate of France passed Milan, Genoa, and Naples. After the exchange of vows, Henry looked around for a nod of approval to kiss his new wife. Some woman with the Queen's stately posture and milky complexion smiled softly and covered her eyes. Catherine thought it was the Queen of France. She was not so far from the truth. She was, of course, the Queen of Henry of Orleans' heart. As a boy, he had fallen in love with Diane de Poitiers, who was old enough to be his mother. It was in the house of Diana's husband that the marriage contract was signed. Catherine and Henry's first wedding night was approaching. Consummation of marriage was an important stage in the lives of royalty. Catherine trembled slightly with fear. She felt as if her gorgeous pearl necklace, a gift from her uncle, was squeezing her throat. She fumbled through the snow-white pearls in her hands to relieve the tension. Suddenly, Queen Eleanor touched her shoulder. "It's time," the Queen said softly. Catherine stood up. She went to the royal golden bedchamber, where servants were already waiting for her. Catherine was helped to change into a snow-white nightgown and lay down on a huge bed, also trimmed with gold. Historians often write about the excitement of girls, but not a word about young men. After all, their excitement sometimes is stronger. Henry was a little worried. He was a prince who likes to read chivalric novels and believes in love for the only woman. And that woman he had. It was Diana. Henry was shy and inexperienced, unlike his hustler father. Francis even wanted to stay to help his son with advice and encouragement in his hour of need, but he left afterwards, convinced of his son's ability to cope with this important mission. From that moment, Catherine passionately attached to her husband, who repaid her only adultery with Diane de Poitiers. Unfortunately for Catherine, suddenly died her uncle, who did not have time to pay France's dowry. And in 1536, the heir to the throne, Francis, died. He was only 18, and his sudden death led the King of France to believe it was poisoning. Henry became heir to the throne. Henry began to visit his lawful wife less often at night, and soon the issue of new heirs became acute. It was only thanks to the efforts of Diana de Poitiers that Henry began to visit Catherine's bedroom again. The fact that Diana was profitable to have a rival in the face of shy Catherine. Henry's other wife might have had a stroppy temper and a powerful family. In 1547, Henry and Catherine became King and Queen of France. However, Catherine's position did not improve much. Henry still spent in the alcove of the lovely Diana. Time seemed to have no power over her. Diana wisely sent her lover again and again to Catherine's chambers for the appearance of new heirs. And Henry, bowing his head slightly, obeyed. Catherine knew perfectly well that she owed her more frequent visits to her rival. How much she hated her, the wretch who had captivated her Henry. Catherine endured. Over the years, tested at court, she learned to hide her true intentions behind a mask of benevolence. In the end, the coldness of her husband made a Florentine noblewoman the same calculating and cruel black queen in mourning dresses. Only by becoming regent for her own children, after the death of Henry II in 1559, Catherine was able to get even with Diana. Henry died in a duel. Diana removed herself from the court. She recovered the crown jewels and the castle of Chenonceau. Although Catherine de Medici disliked her rival, she did not retaliate. For the returned castle of Chenonceau, the queen gave Diana Chaumont-sur-Loire. Diana de Poitiers, Duchesse de Valentinois, died at the age of 66. Catherine de Medici died in 1589 at the age of 69 in the castle of Blois, leaving a vivid mark on French history. And the story of Diane de Poitiers will be told in a separate video. Subscribe to my channel not to miss new videos.